we have a very extra special treat. We have somebody who attended and graduated from...
Yeah, didn't graduate.
Oh, sorry, didn't graduate. Attended Terra Linda High School back when, right after Woodstock, was that it? They probably don't even know what Woodstock is.
I know.
Peanuts.
Is that what
Okay. In any case, Jonathan Stern here is a local hero of cetacean awareness and research, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how San Francisco Bay has a renewed sense of what?
Porpoise.
Porpoise! Let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank
Okay.
you. It's kind of weird to be back here.
Your business.
There's a lot of memories from Terra High School that were fun. Actually, it's really weird. This is here. I just had my knees replaced. And it just is grossing me out. Because I know what they had to do. So I'm really happy to come here to talk about this project I'm working on. It's a... how I got involved with porpoises is just kind of a weird thing. It was a discovery that I made one day while moving my boat from Sausalito to Oakland. So anyway, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about porpoises in San Francisco Bay historically, and then tell you about their leaving. They got kicked out of San Francisco Bay. And they were out of San Francisco Bay for 65 years, and they returned. So that's the story I wanted to tell you about. Can you turn off the lights? Especially when we're still out that way. How you? So this is a photograph taken right outside of the Golden Gate, right, like the bridge would be just right over there, and you might recognize this Russian church there. And this is a porpoise just sort of swimming around. And this is an illustration of a porpoise. A porpoise is actually a small whale. They get to be about 6 feet long. They're fairly small. They're amongst the smallest of the whales. They have small, sharp teeth in the upper and lower jaws. They weigh upwards of around 200 pounds. So they're really not all that big. And they're really easy to miss when you're out in a boat because they only come out of the water about that high. So they're really, really small. They're difficult to see. They live to be about 10 to 12 years old. And they're among the most skittish, I didn't even talk about that. They're among the most skittish of the dolphins, whales, and porpoises. Now, porpoises are small, they're kind of chunky compared to dolphins, which are much bigger, usually. The dolphins also have a pronounced snout. The porpoise doesn't have the snout. The dolphin also has a fin on its back that's curved backwards. The porpoise has a fin that's more triangular shaped, sort of like an isosceles triangle. I remember that from my geometry class. Porpoise is from the Latin pigfish, because I don't know why. I can never understand what the Latins figure. So along the west coast of North America, porpoises are divided up into a number of stocks, or populations, if you will, ranging from Point Conception in the south all the way up to the Gulf of Alaska. And the group of porpoises that I'm going to be talking about is what's called the Russian River San Francisco stock, of which there's about 9,000 porpoises. Okay, so I want to tell you a story about a bay. This is a bay, so San Francisco Bay. Harbor porpoises used to come into San Francisco Bay. There is evidence for this. If you go over to Emeryville in the East Bay, there's a midden, which is a place where Native Americans used to put stuff that they used, like carcasses of things and just whatever they were using. So there's this big pile of stuff there. And if you dig into the middens, and you go down deeper and deeper and deeper, you're sort of going back in time. And as you go back in time, you can find dolphin and porpoise bones throughout these middens. So there's evidence of porpoises that go back 700 years BC in San Francisco Bay, which is kind of neat. So we think porpoises have been around for a while, for a long time in San Francisco Bay. And San Francisco Bay remained pretty much unchanged until the 1800s, when humans came around and started changing the bay. They started filling in the bay, they started polluting the bay, they started diverting water, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware. And things just started changing.
Were they eating them?
I'm sorry?
Were they eating them?
Yeah. This is a photograph from the 1930s. This is right before World War II. This is the Bay Bridge that's being built. San Francisco's here. This is Treasure Island. And this is Treasure Island being, or that's here Laguna, sorry. This is Treasure Island. And Treasure Island is actually an artificial island that was built up from sediment that was dredged from San Francisco Bay and piled into this little island. So the building of Treasure Island added a lot of sediment to the bay. It also changed currents in the bay. It did a whole bunch of stuff. Also, bridges were being built. Here's the Golden Gate Bridge being built before the deck is put in. Here are the two towers. And there was actually a walkway out here for the workmen. And this walkway changed the tidal flow coming into and out of the bay. What we think, and so there's all these changes that are happening to San Francisco Bay in the 30s. But what we think is the main cause for porpoises leaving San Francisco Bay is this little thing I like to call World War II. And San Francisco Bay during World War II was a lot different than it is now, because they had a minefield out here. Because there was a big concern about Japanese submarines coming into San Francisco Bay and torpedoing the naval ships that were in the bay, especially over in Oakland. So there was a minefield that was set up here and here. And also, there was a net that was stretched across from Sausalito to Crissy Field. And this net was just amazing. It had a metal mesh, and here's the submarine nets, and this is a square. It's 4 feet by 4 feet, which is big enough for a porpoise to get through, actually, if a porpoise wanted to do that. And the Navy realized that the net was big enough that a torpedo could go through, so they put in these rings that were much smaller in diameter. And they would hang the torpedo net in front of the submarine net. So torpedoes couldn't come in, but porpoises couldn't either. So we think this was a barrier that kept harbor porpoises from coming into San Francisco Bay. And this is kind of a photograph. There's San Francisco there, Sausalito's here. And I don't know if you can see these sort of white squiggly lines here, but this is turbulence of tide coming through the gate, washing over the surface of this net, which goes all the way to the bottom. And you can kind of get an idea that this is a pretty effective barrier to anything wanting to come into the bay or go out of the bay. The only way you could get into the bay for ships to get in would be these two boats here. They'd open up the net and let ships come in. Okay, so we think around 1940 is when the porpoises were excluded from San Francisco Bay. That's sort of the date we're working from. Now, this doesn't mean porpoises were completely gone from the coast. Some guys that I'm working with did some surveys of porpoises. Here's Point Reyes, here's San Francisco here. And all these little dots here show that, you know, porpoises are seen outside of the Golden Gate, but just not inside the Golden Gate. And there are very few sightings actually, 1 or 2 sightings of harbor porpoises in San Francisco Bay from 1940 through about 2006. Then in 2008, when I was going from Sausalito to Oakland in my boat, I ran into a school of 25 porpoises inside of the Golden Gate. And this sort of prompted us to start this study. So our area of focus is right here, central San Francisco Bay. And we have a boat, and we go out on this boat, and here I am in my little boat. And here's a mother porpoise and a baby porpoise here, and I'm taking this photograph, actually. And this picture of me in my boat taking this picture was actually taken by a friend of mine who was standing on the bridge. So there he is standing on the bridge. He looks like he's depressed and about to jump off, but he's really just photographing porpoises. And it turns out, if you have a nice big lens, like a 300mm lens, you can take really nice photographs of porpoises from the bridge. And what we realized is we're able to start recognizing individual porpoises based upon color patterns. See, this porpoise has a lot of white here. This porpoise has a little bit of white here and some white on his little head. Here's his little blowhole, so he breathes through. And here's his little fin. So here's two different porpoises. This one's, they're different. Just trust. I just threw up some pictures to show you some different porpoises. Here's one that has fairly light skin. Here's one that's pretty dark. We actually found this porpoise. It's not a albino, but it's pretty white. It's called leuconistic. That is, it's lacking a pigment in the skin. And we got sent to us some video that this guy took from the Golden Gate Bridge. If I can make this work, it would be really cool. It's right there. They swim really fast and they change directions a lot. And the thing that's really cool about working from the bridge versus the boat is when you're on a boat, especially my boat, which is really low to the water, porpoises sort of out at an angle like that. But from the bridge, you're looking down on them. And you can look down in the water and you can actually see them doing stuff. So we're seeing things in San Francisco Bay that people around the world that have been studying porpoises for decades have never, ever, ever seen. We presented our results at a few international conferences. And people, like I said, that study harbor porpoises and other places just are amazed at the kind of stuff that we're seeing. So it's really, we live in a really cool place. I meant to take that one out. Oh, we see lots of scar patterns on porpoises, and we're not really sure what causes these scars, but they're really cool because we can use them for identification purposes. We call this guy bird head, because if you look really closely, the scar looks like a bird head. We're not all that clever in terms of naming them, evidently. But the thing that's really cool about this is, if you can identify individuals, you can start counting how many porpoises come into San Francisco Bay. And to date, we've identified over 620 individual porpoises in San Francisco Bay. And actually, on one day, 2 weeks ago, within 2 hours, we counted 140 porpoises. It's pretty cool. If you think about what's going on here, this is like really, really neat. You know, we see porpoises, here's the Golden Gate Bridge here. We see porpoises usually around the North Tower and around the South Tower. And when we're out in the boat, we follow them, and they go by Cavallo Point right here. And they head to Belvedere and Tiburon, because that's a nice place to go. And they go through Raccoon Strait. And then they'll come around Angel Island, go around Alcatraz, and go back out. They seem to come in with an incoming tide, and they leave with an outgoing tide. So one of the things that we're trying to figure out is whether they actually are components of the San Francisco Bay ecosystem, or they just follow oceanic water that comes into the bay and leave with that oceanic water as it goes out. Or do they actually, come into San Francisco Bay and hang out and eat San Francisco Bay fish, like anchovies, which are around a lot. And we really think they do. And in fact, this is one of the reasons that we think that the porpoises have returned. I'll get to that in a bit. I wanted to show you a picture, a couple more pictures. This porpoise we're going to see a photograph of in a little bit, but this one has this V-shaped scar here. And we saw this one in September 2010, and this same individual was seen about a month later in San Francisco. We do see some interactions with, or evidence of interactions with nets. Here's the head of a porpoise, and you can see this scar here, and the scar is on the other side as well. And what we think is this porpoise swam into a net, got caught, but was able to remove itself from the net, but there was a scar that was left. We've also seen some interactions with predators. Here is a harbor porpoise. The head, the dorsal fin, the tail's here. And I don't know if you can make this out, but this is a huge chunk of the tail stalk that's missing. He got bit. He may have gotten bitten. He most likely got bit outside of San Francisco Bay and came in, you know. But we've seen this guy a lot. So he was able to survive this attack. One thing I wanted to mention about shark attacks, this is something really weird that happened a couple months ago. I was out on the bridge with this friend of mine, and we saw this huge splash right where we had seen the sea lion. And this was about a mile inside of the Golden Gate. So it was a big splash. And then we saw this big red stain in the water. And then we saw this oily sheen on the surface. I had my camera with a 400mm lens, and I was able to see something. There was something big underwater. Could have been the sea lion. It could have been, I don't know what. But this friend of mine I was with is a photographer for National Geographic. He's seen lots of shark attacks on lots of different things, and to him, this looked like a shark attack inside San Francisco Bay, which, you know, is really sort of cool to think about. Anyway, that's the shark attack one. This is a really weird porpoise. Because if you look at it closely, you know, here's the head, here's the blowhole, here's the body. And then he evidently got rammed by something. This side is pushed in. So he looks kind of like a big comma. You can sort of see this bulge here. So what we think is he got rammed from here and sort of displaced his internal organs. And we've seen him a few times. I think we saw him recently, and he's still doing fine. But he's got this really weird depression in him. And I'll talk about that in a second as well. And we see parasites. I'm sorry. One of the things that we're concerned about is vessel interactions. Here is a boat out on San Francisco Bay. Here's a harbor porpoise here. And one of the things with vessel interactions is that when boats are moving through the water, they project their sound backwards. So the sound of this ship isn't going out omnidirectional from the ship. It's being projected backwards. So a whale or a dolphin or a porpoise that's in front of the ship doesn't hear it very well. And hearing is the main sense that these animals use. So if they can't hear a ship approaching, they might just say run into trouble, but trouble more likely runs into them, actually. Sorry. And in fact, I mean, that's just a terrible thing to say for the next photograph. This is a picture of a harbor porpoise that we found on Angel Island, who was decapitated, but has these marks that are indicative of a propeller wound. These types of, the spacing here means that it's a small propeller. It's a real fast-moving propeller. So what probably happened is a fast-moving motorboat approached a harbor porpoise. Porpoise couldn't hear it, and the boat just ran over the porpoise, and the propeller dug into him and decapitated it as well. So that's one of the concerns we have about porpoises returning to San Francisco Bay. Another one is oil spills. This is, of course, the Golden Gate Bridge here. This is Cavallo Point, which is in the Marin County side. It's a place where if you want to go see porpoises, but don't want to go walk across the Golden Gate to see them, they just come streaming right through and right past here. You can actually, on a good day, you can stand at Cavallo Point and throw rocks at porpoises and hit them, but that's illegal, so you shouldn't do that. But you could if you wanted to go to jail. It's a $10,000 fine, it turns out. But I'm sorry. But anyway, there was an oil spill back in 2007 that just plastered this area where porpoises, we see a lot of porpoises. And in fact, the first documented sighting we had of a harbor porpoise in San Francisco Bay was from a helicopter from KCRA-TV that was flying over this spot and filmed a mother and calf porpoise in this oil spill. So it's one of the concerns that we have about them coming into San Francisco Bay. So why are they into San Francisco Bay? If you look at San Francisco Bay from the bridge, here's Angel Island here, you notice that it's really rough here. There's a lot of turbulence, especially when the tide is changing. And in the ocean, turbulence is a good thing. Turbulence brings nutrients up to the surface. And nutrients at the surface of the ocean is like fertilizing your lawn. So there's a lot of little single-celled algae. It's much like grass. And they need sunlight to grow, and they also need nutrients. So you see a lot of nutrients in these areas where there's a lot of turbulence. And where you see a lot of algae, you see a lot of fish that like to eat algae. So these types of areas are where we see things like anchovy, which happens to be something that porpoises like to eat. So we like to go hang out where there's these areas of turbulence, because oftentimes we see porpoises. If you were to take San Francisco Bay and remove the drain plug, you would see that it's a really complicated place. Here's the Golden Gate Bridge here. Angel Island is here. Alcatraz is over here. But it's a really amazing bathymetry or topography of the bottom of San Francisco Bay. So we're going to take a little trip, a little flight through San Francisco Bay here. So here's Alcatraz, here's Angel Island. The Golden Gate Bridge is there. And this is going to give you kind of a porpoise eye view of what the world that they live in when they come to San Francisco. Where'd that little thing go? I'm trying to do this without my glasses. Okay, so you're just sort of flying along. There's no splash, so you can't really tell. But you can see this deep spot here off of Angel Island. This is the southeast end of Angel Island. And we're going around the back end of Angel Island like if you were to take the ferry to Larkspur. So we come around Angel Island and we see a really deep spot here, and a real deep spot here, and a deep spot there. And where you see these deep spots, this is where this upwelling, this turbulence occurs. And this happens to be places that we see lots of porpoises. I'm getting airsick. So, look at all this topography. And this means when the water moves through the bay with the tides, there's a lot of churning of the water, a lot of upwelling. One place that is really, really cool, here's this Cavallo Point once again. If you go out of Cavallo Point a few hundred yards, there's, it's called Cavallo Spire. It's this little mountain that comes up from the bottom, which is about 300 feet deep, and rises to about 70 feet underwater. And when the tides are coming in and out of the gate, you just see these massive upwellings of water. These upwellings mean nutrients, and it's a place where these porpoises like to come. Okay, so there's been these upwellings for thousands of years in San Francisco Bay. The submarine nets were removed in 1945. Why didn't the porpoises return as soon as the nets were removed? Well, one reason we think is that San Francisco Bay, prior to World War II, but certainly during World War II and after World War II, became a very polluted place. When I was growing up in Terra Linda, just a few blocks from here actually, if we wanted to go to the beach, we couldn't go to any beaches in San Francisco Bay. It was just too polluted. When you crossed over the Bay Bridge, it just smelled. You could just smell the junk in the water. You could see stuff floating in the water. It was a horrible place. It wasn't very productive. There wasn't a lot of plant life, little algae cells, I should say, floating in the water. This just wasn't an inviting place for porpoises to come. You know, they were living out on the coast. There's lots of fish out there. There's no reason to come into San Francisco Bay. But something changed. Something changed around 2000. The Pacific Ocean goes through phases. It goes through warm phases. It goes through cold phases. In 1999, the Pacific Ocean switched. It's like somebody hit a light switch, and the Pacific Ocean got cold. Colder ocean waters mean there's more productivity. And with this more productivity, we got things that are really, really cool. Crabs and shrimp. They're really, really cool because they taste really good. But they're really, really cool because, you know, they're offshore, they're coastal animals. But what they did is they moved into San Francisco Bay. And they needed something to eat. And one of the things they began to eat were little clams. Now these clams aren't really native to San Francisco Bay, but these clams do this really weird thing, is they filter water. They just bring water into their shells, and they filter out what's ever in the water and expel the water. So they're eating things in the water. And what they were eating was plankton. So these little clams were removing all the algae that the fish in San Francisco Bay really needed. Okay, is everybody with me with this?
Yeah.
This is kind of a complicated thing. It's kind of a weird thing. So these clams are sucking up all the plankton. But then in marches the crabs and shrimp that starts eating these clams. And with the decline of these clams means there's more plankton in the water. So fish populations started increasing. Also, by 2000, San Francisco Bay was cleaning up a lot. And we think, you know, a cleaner bay, a more productive bay is a place that porpoises would eventually return to. And we think this is what has happened. Now this bay didn't get cleaned up just because it got cleaned up. It got cleaned up because people put their foot down. They got tired of seeing San Francisco Bay being filled in for development. They got tired of seeing San Francisco Bay really polluted. So they started real grassroots, seagrass roots. No, that's just terrible. They started a real grassroots efforts to clean up San Francisco Bay, and I think this is one of the results that we see. So we see porpoises in San Francisco Bay, and you know, we see porpoises, we see birds, and these birds are following porpoises. And these birds are following porpoises because the porpoises can find food. And here's a picture of a porpoise who is corralling. It's hard to really see, but he's chasing a couple of fish around here. And they chase fish usually by turning on their sides. And this is something that we can see from the Golden Gate Bridge that you can't see from a boat. This is something nobody's ever seen porpoises do, actually chase and catch fish. You'd think, I mean, everybody would see that, but au contraire. Here's another fish. Here's another porpoise. I mean, this got us really excited. Here's a porpoise with delusions of grandeur. He's trying to eat the salmon. And he batted around with his head for a while, but it's just too big for him to eat. We see porpoises in groups. And this kind of gets us to one of the behaviors that we've seen from San Francisco, from the Golden Gate Bridge, that's never, ever, ever been seen, and it's one of the focuses of our studies. And this is the mating behavior of porpoises. It's commonly thought that porpoises and dolphins mate in this kind of orientation, where the female or the male is swimming that away, is a normal orientation, and the male or the female turns upside down, and mating occurs. In this case, the male is supposed to be underneath. So the male inserts his penis into the vagina of the female. And that's what's thought that porpoises do as well. Now, one day, a few years ago, in 2010, my colleague took this photograph. This is a porpoise jumping out of the water. And he thought, oh, cool, I got a picture of a porpoise jumping out of the water. But when he got home and he put this photograph on his computer and sort of blew up the image, this is what he saw. And I was told I could show these pictures, so this is what he saw. So here's the porpoise here. And this thing is the penis. It goes from here all the way to there. I know. That's what I said. This is the tail of a female, it turns out. Yeah, so, not a diggity, man, So, here we go. It seems sort of funny, it seems sort of dorky, but, up to this point, nobody really knew how porpoises did this stuff. So here's the male porpoise, here's the female porpoise, and what they do, what the male does, is he swims around until he finds a female, and he comes up from behind and underneath her, and always from the left. And he swims up to her, and hopefully she's receptive. Hopefully she says sure, because if she doesn't, she turns. She just goes like that, and he goes shooting out of the water like that poor clown did. This guy's a sport. Sorry, this guy was successful. Here's a female. Here's a male. Here's the female's calf. He doesn't care. Here, remember this one, the one with the V-shaped scar? She's a female, it turns out. Here's the male mating with. Sorry, a friend of mine just gave me a whole bunch of these pictures, and I threw them in. A swing and a miss. That's that one.
I knew it.
So, it's really cool, and springtime's coming, you guys, and this is the time to get out and go to the Golden Gate Bridge, and we see porpoises shooting out of the water, and which they do. They're these little rockets. They're not jumping for joy. It turns out they're jumping, because she turned or something like that. So here's we're also starting to see calves being born. Not born. We don't see them being born, but we're seeing mothers with really small calves. And here's a mom, and here's her baby. And here's a picture to give you an idea of what it looks like when a calf is nursing. These are mammals. They're fed milk. So here's the mom. Here's the calf underneath. It's really kind of a cool thing. Now, one of the really neat things that about this return of porpoises to San Francisco Bay in such great numbers is kind of like this. In the coastal waters, these porpoises range from the San Mateo coast, southern San Mateo coast up to the Russian River. It's a big chunk of ocean. And we got 9,000 porpoises spread out over that region. But what happens is, when they come into San Francisco Bay, they come in through the Golden Gate here, which is a very narrow opening. And like I say, on a good observation day, we see 150 porpoises in an hour going through the Golden Gate. So think about this. If you're a male and you want to meet girls, you're going to go to a place where the girls hang out. Okay? So females, when they come into San Francisco Bay, it's just not one or two that's coming into San Francisco Bay. It's a bunch of them right here. So if you're a male, there's a really great strategy to meet females is to hang out at the Golden Gate Bridge. Because there's a high density of females there. It's really neat. When biologists look at strategies, they look at optimal strategies. What animals and plants do that optimizes the chances for them being successful, whether that's mating or finding food or avoiding predators or whatever. But if you're looking for a resource, and by resource I mean something that you're going to use, wow, I shouldn't say that. Because, I mean, a resource is something like food, water, space. A mate is a resource. That's why you shouldn't use the word use, because I said that once to my ex-wife, and hey, resource. Boy, that went over really bad. Anyway, never mind. So anyway, you know, if you're a male looking for females, there's a high density of females there. If you're a female, you also can go to a place where there's a lot of males that you can choose with whom you want to mate with. You don't have to wait, you know, you're out here in the open ocean, but there's a very few, your chances of running into a male are very small, because, you know, it's just a big expanse. You know, you're not sure when you're going to run into another male. And if it's breeding season, you might mate with somebody that, you know, But if there's a high concentration of males here, you can be picky. And in fact, if you look at least mammalian mating strategies, we always think that, you know, the guys choose. You know, you look at elephant seals. Elephant seals have a mating strategy where there's one male that holds a territory that's got 20, 30 females. And for the longest time, people thought, you know, males dominate this society. Nah. The male, it doesn't matter. The female chooses the best beach. And the male that's there happens to be the male that can find the best beach and defend the best beach. But females are always choosing who they're going to mate with. Always, always. Sorry, fellas. It is. Female choice. And it's a really cool thing. Anyway, this is what we think is going on in San Francisco Bay. At least part of it is, you know, they come into this area where you get a lot of porpoises in a limited space. There's a high density of porpoises, which means that your chance of finding a mate is good. The chance of finding food is really good, because these guys are group hunters, and they use their sonar, the sounds they emit, to look for prey. So if you hunt with, you know, with friends, you're more likely to find food. So this is a really cool ecological thing that's going on here at the Golden Gate Bridge. I called it the funnel of love one day, and that just sort of stuck with us. But the idea of taking...
Northgate Mall.
I'm sorry?
You should call it Northgate Mall.
Oh no.
Right?
Really? Is it that bad now? Anyway, we go from a low density to high density, and that's just a really cool life history strategy there. Now, if you go into San Francisco Bay or along Ocean Beach or Land's End, you may also see something that looks like a porpoise swimming by. But these are much larger. These are dolphins. Here's a guy on a paddleboard, and here's a bottlenose dolphin. This is kind of bottlenose dolphin, I was going to say like on the TV show Flipper, but forget that. But these are bottlenose dolphins, and you can see them at Ocean Beach all the time. And these guys have come up from Southern California in 1982 when there was an El Nino. I don't know if you guys know what El Nino is. It's a warming of the ocean, right? So all this warm water came up from Southern California, and these dolphins came with it. And when the warm water went away, the dolphins stayed. I remember that the day that we discovered dolphins off of San Francisco, there was a dead one in Pacifica. And I used to work at California Academy of Sciences, and whenever there was a dead whale or a dolphin, I would go cut it up, which is a weird thing to do. But this dolphin was really big. It's about 12 feet long, and we couldn't. There were 3 of us. We couldn't carry it, so we took off the head, and we were bringing it back to Cal Academy of Sciences. So we're carrying this head, and I said to my friends, I said, I bet you there's not another dolphin for 300 miles. At which point, a school of them swam by. So this sort of, reinforced the idea that things don't stay the same all the time, and things like El Niños really change the local environment. So we now have bottlenose dolphins that live, or that come into San Francisco Bay as well. And here's a picture of some bottlenose dolphins. And once again, you can identify these guys based upon distinctive dorsal fin shapes, distinctive scar patterns. So we're able to count these dolphins, and we actually have identified some of these dolphins from Monterey, or in Monterey, and some of these dolphins in San Diego. In fact, and also one of the dolphins that we have here in San Francisco was first identified in Ensenada, Baja, in Mexico. Swam all the way up the coast. It's really neat. And as these dolphins have come into San Francisco Bay, these are top predators. And so they've sort of changed the ecology of San Francisco Bay, as have the harbor porpoises, who once they come into the bay are also top predators. But instead of feeding on anchovies, these bottlenose dolphins are feeding on larger things, like salmon, which is really kind of cool. So here's this map that I showed you before. The purple shows you where the porpoises hang out. The yellow shows you where the dolphins hang out. A great place to see dolphins is at Fort Point. You see them just rounding this corner and heading along the shoreline. Now this separation is kind of nice for the porpoises, and there's a reason for that. And I'll tell you about that in a second. Dolphins have this image of being very friendly. And I have a friend that surfs in Ocean Beach, and the dolphins come up to him and stuff like that. And they're perfectly wonderful. But they're not necessarily the most peaceful of creatures. They fight amongst themselves. I mean, the fin of this guy is torn up. It's not torn up for any other reason than other dolphins in this group are biting him. Really. But something else has been seen recently occurring. This has occurred in the UK. This has occurred in New England, and now off Monterey, and more recently off San Francisco, is that these bottlenose dolphins, and we've identified who is doing this, are attacking harbor porpoises. And here's a picture. Here's a harbor porpoise, and here's a bottlenose dolphin ramming the lower jaw. And this dolphin has killed this porpoise, and when we cut it up, we found that the lower jaw was broken, the upper jaw was broken, all the ribs were broken, all the internal organs were bleeding. These dolphins are not, not these little peaceful men in wetsuits swimming around. And it turns out that we were able to identify the individual dolphins that were killing these porpoises. And it turns out to be a group of juvenile males, teenagers, who were just out being male teenagers, mostly. Like I said, I'm sorry?
They were doing it for kicks?
Well, it could be. It could also be, there's a real group structure, and juvenile males, they start reaching sexual maturity, and they start, wanting to show how tough they are. And the adult males beat them up to put them in their place. So if these juvenile males are feeling a bit,
Full of beans?
yeah, or, they try and mate with a female, they get beat up. I mean, they do that all the time. They try and mate with females all the time. And one of the things that they think is that they might find a porpoise and they take out their frustrations on something they can beat up. Like I said, we found a dead porpoise at Ocean Beach recently that just had all of its bones shattered. So, wow, that's sort of a depressing note. But anyway, the thing I want to leave you with is this, and this is kind of an important story. We're working on a paper for Conservation Biology, a scientific journal about this, is that we have porpoises that used to live in San Francisco Bay up until around 1940, at which point they were physically excluded from coming into San Francisco Bay. Then, an accumulation of pollution, low productivity, and just being a rotten place to be, kept the porpoises from coming into San Francisco Bay. But over the span of several decades, people decided to do something about the state of San Francisco Bay. And between these people changing the amount of pollution that comes into San Francisco Bay, and by helping to clean up San Francisco Bay, and this big oceanographic shift towards a more productive coastal ecosystem, we now have a San Francisco Bay that is turned out to be a habitat that was available for porpoises to recolonize, which they've done. And they've done so in huge numbers. And so the Bay Area is San Francisco Bay, ringed by about 7 million people. And our backyard, the San Francisco Bay, is one of the few examples of a habitat that was degraded severely and has come back. And, porpoises are not, porpoises are just charismatic megafauna, but they're indicative of an ecosystem that is returning to a more healthy state. So we live in a place, we all know that the Bay Area is a special place. And this is yet another reason why the San Francisco Bay Area is a real special place, is we have people here that care enough about the region to do something about it. So I'm going to change this picture because it's sort of bumming me out. So there's a porpoise, and they're back. There's the back of a porpoise. Wow, I knew that was going to bomb. I knew that was going to bomb. So anyway, if you ever want to go see porpoises, go to the Golden Gate Bridge any day of the year. They're there. Usually when the tides are changing is the best time to see them. But we also see whales coming into the bay. We see dolphins coming into the bay. It's a great thing to do. And if you have people visiting and you don't know what to do with them, tell them to go to the bridge for the day. And so you can go out and go to the mall or something like that. Well, anyway, thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.